prepared for tonight's hunt?
I've been thinking, we need to be more discreet.
There's nothing wrong with what we're doing.
You know the old man doesn't like it. Let's just not be too obvious.
Well, hello. I'm about to read a book. Well, a few books. They go in order. This is the first one, Beggar, by Revan. SKYRIM was the last of the litter of 5 born to the queen of the prosperous Nordic kingdom of Earlgard. La Pircopa and her husband, the king of Earlgard, Ytliaf. During pregnancy, the queen had been more than twice as wide as she was tall, and the act of delivery took 3 months and 6 days after it had begun. It is perhaps understandable that the La Pircopa elected upon expelling Eslaf to frown, say good riddance, and die. Like many Nords, Ytliaf did not care very much for his wife and less for his children. His subjects were puzzled, therefore, when he announced that he would follow the ancient tradition of his people of Admora of following his beloved spouse to the grave. They had not thought they were particularly in love, nor were they aware that such a tradition existed. Still, the simple people were grateful for the little royal drama, alleviated their boredom, which was a common problem in the more obscure parts of northern Skyrim, particularly in wintertide. He gathered his household staff and his 5 fat, bawling little liars in front of him, and divided his estate. To his son Yenop, he gave his title. To his son Leirno, he gave his land. To his son Soybud, he gave his fortune. To his daughter Leisafitra, he gave his army. Ytliaf's advisors had suggested he keep the inheritance together for the good of the kingdom, but Ytliaf did not particularly care for his advisors, or the kingdom for that matter. Upon making his announcement, he drew his dagger across his throat. One of the nurses, who was rather shy, finally decided to speak as the king's life ebbed away. "Your Highness, you forgot your 5th child, little Eslaf." "Good," Yetlaf groaned. "It is somewhat hard to concentrate with blood gushing from one's throat after all." The king tried in vain to think of something to bequeath, but there was nothing left. Finally he sputtered irritably, "Eslaf should have taken something then. He died." That a babe, but a few days old, was expected to demand his rightful inheritance was arguably unfair. But so SKYRIM was given his birthright with his father's dying breath. He would have nothing. He would have nothing but what he had taken. Since no one else would have him, the shy nurse, whose name was Drusba, took the baby home. It was a decrepit little shack, and over the years that followed it became more and more decrepit. Unable to find work, Drusba sold all her furnishings to buy food for little Eslaf. By the time he was old enough to walk and talk, she had sold the walls and the roof as well, so they had nothing but a floor to call home. And if you've ever been to Skyrim, you can appreciate that is scarcely sufficient. Drusba did not tell Eslaf the story of his birth, or that his brothers and sisters were leading quite nice lives with their inheritances. For, as we have said, she was rather shy and found it difficult to broach the subject. She was so painfully shy, in fact, that whenever he asked any questions about where he came from, Drusba would run away. That was more or less her answer to everything. To flee. In order to communicate with her at all, Eslaf learned how to run almost as soon as he could walk. He couldn't keep up with his adopted mother at first, but in time he learned to go toe, heel. If he anticipated a short but fast sprint, and heel, toe, if it seemed Druspa was headed for a long-distance marathon flight. He never did get all the answers he needed from her, but Eslaf did learn how to run. The kingdom of Erlgard had, in years that Eslaf was growing, became quite a grim place. King Yinyop did not have a treasury, for Subud had been given that. He did not have any property for income. For Larno had been given that. He did not have an army to protect the people. For Las Safidra had been given that. Furthermore, as he was but a child, all decisions in the kingdom went through Yinop's rather corrupt council. It had become a bureaucratic, exploitive land of high taxes, rampant crime, and regular incursions from neighboring kingdoms. Not a particular unusual situation for a kingdom of Tamriel, but an unpleasant one nonetheless. The time finally came when the tax collector arrived to Druspa's hovel, such as it was, to collect the only thing he could, the floor. Rather than protest, the poor shy maid ran away, and Eslaf never saw her again. Without a home or a mother, Eslaf did not know what to do. He had grown accustomed to the old, cold open air in Druspa's shack, but he was hungry. "May I have a piece of meat?" he asked the butcher down the street. "I'm very hungry." The man had known the boy for years, often spoke to his wife about how sorry he felt for him. Growing up in a home with no ceilings or walls, he smiled at Eslaf and said, "Go away, or I'll hit you." Eslaf hurriedly left the butcher and went to a nearby tavern. The tavern keeper had been a former valet in the king's court, and knew the boy was by right a prince. Many times he had seen the poor, ragged lad in the streets and sighed at the way fate had treated him. "May I have something to eat?" Eslaf asked his tavern keeper. "I'm very hungry." "You're lucky I don't cook you up and eat you," replied the tavern keeper. Eslaf hurriedly left the tavern for the rest of the day. The boy approached the good citizens of Erlgard, begging for food. One person had thrown something at him, but it turned out to be an inedible rock. As night fell, a raggedy man came up to Eslaf, and without saying a word, handed him a piece of fruit and a piece of dried meat. The lad took it, wide-eyed, as he devoured it. He thanked the man very sweetly. "If I see you begging on the streets tomorrow," the man growled, "I'll kill you myself. There are only so many beggars we of the guild allow in any one town, and you make it one too many. You're ruining business." It was a good thing Eslaf Arrow knew how to run. He ran all night. Eslaf Arrow's story is continued in the book Thief. Thief by Revan. If the reader has not yet had the pleasure of reading the first volume in these series on the life of Eslaf Arrow, which we just read, Beggar, he should close this book immediately, for I shan't recap. I will tell you this much, gentle reader. When we last saw Eslaf, he was a poor boy, an orphan, a failed beggar, running through the wild winter woods of SKYRIM, away from his home of Erlgard. He continued running, stopping here and there for many, many more years until he was a young man. Eslaf discovered that among the ways of getting food, asking for it was the most troublesome. Far easier was finding it in the wilderness or taking it from unguarded market stalls. The only thing worse than begging to get food was begging for the opportunity to work for the money to buy it. That seemed needlessly complicated. No, as far as Eslaf was concerned, he was best off being a scavenger, a beggar, and a thief. He committed his first act of thievery shortly after leaving Earlgard, well in the southern woods of Tamburkar, in the rugged land near Mount Jensen, just east of the village of Horbeld. Eslaf was starving, having not eaten anything but a rather scrawny raw squirrel in 4 days, and he smelled meat cooking and then found the smoke. A band of minstrel bards was making camp. He watched them from the bushes as they cooked and joked and flirted and sang. He could have asked them for some food, but so many others had refused him before. Instead, he rushed out, grabbed a piece of meat from the fire, and wincing from the burn, scrambled up the nearest tree to devour it, while the bard stood under him and laughed. "What is your next move, thief?" giggled a fair red-headed woman who was covered with tattoos. "How do you intend to disappear without us catching and punishing you?" As the hunger subsided, Eslaf realized she was right. The only way to get out of the tree without falling in their midst was to take the branch down to where it hung over a creek. It was a drop off a cliff of about 50 feet. That seemed like the wisest strategy, so Eslaf began crawling in that direction. "You do know how to fall, boy," called out a young Khajiit, but a few years older than Eslaf, thin but muscular, graceful in his slightest movements. "If you don't, you should just climb down here and take what's coming to you. It's idiotic to break your neck when we just give you some bruises and send you on your way." "Of course I know how to fall," Eslaf called back, but he didn't. He just thought the trick of falling was to have nothing underneath you and let nature take its course. But 50 feet up when you're looking down is enough to give anyone pause. "I'm sorry to doubt your abilities, Master Thief," said the Khajiit, grinning. "Obviously you know to fall feet first with your body straight, but loose to avoid cracking like an egg. It seems you are destined to escape us." Eslaf wisely followed the Khajiit's hints and leapt into the river, falling without much grace but without hurting himself. In the years that followed, he had to make several more drops from even greater heights, usually after a theft, sometimes without water beneath him, and he improved the basic technique. When he arrived in the western town of Jotunheim on the morning of his 21st birthday, it didn't take him long to find out who was the richest person, most deserving of being burgled. An impregnable palace in a park near the center of town was owned by a mysterious young man named Suyabud. Eslaf wasted no time in finding the palace and watching it. A fortified palace, he had come to learn, was like a person with quirks and habits beneath its hard shell. It was not an old place. Evidently, whatever money this Suyabud had come into was fairly recent. It was regularly patrolled by guards, implying that the rich man was fearful of being burgled. With good reason. The most distinctive feature of the palace was its tower, rising 100 feet above the stone walls, doubtless giving the occupant a good defensive view. Eslaf guessed that if Suyabud was as paranoid as he guessed him to be, the tower would also provide a view of the palace storehouse. The rich man would want to keep an eye on his fortune. That meant that the loot couldn't be directly beneath the tower, but somewhere in the courtyard within the walls. The light in the tower shone all night long, so Eslaf boldly decided that the best time to burgle was by the light of day, when Suyabud must sleep. That would be the time the guards would least expect a thief to pounce. And so when the noon sun was shining over the palace, Eslaf quickly scaled the wall near the front gate and waited. Hidden in the crenellations, the interior courtyard was plain and desolate, with few places to hide. But he saw that there were two wells. One the guards used from time to time to draw up water and slake their thirst, but Eslaf noticed that the guards would pass by the other well, never using it. He waited until the guards were distracted, just for a second, by the arrival of a merchant in a wagon bearing goods for the palace. While they were searching his wagon, Eslaf leapt elegantly, feet first, from the wall into the well. It was not a particularly soft landing, for, as Eslaf had guessed, the well was not full of water, but gold. Still, he knew how to roll after a fall and didn't hurt himself. In the dank subterranean storehouse, he stuffed his pockets with gold and was about to go to the door, which he assumed would lead to the tower, when he noticed a gem the size of an apple, worth more than all the gold that was left. Eslaf found room for it down his pants. The door did indeed lead to the tower, and Eslaf followed its curving stairwell up, walking quietly but quickly. At the top, he found the master of the palace's private quarters, ornate and cold, with invaluable artwork and decorative swords and shields on the walls. Eslaf assumed the snoring lump under the sheets was Soybud, but he didn't investigate too closely. He crept to the windows and looked out. It was going to be a difficult fall for Certs. He needed to jump from the tower, past the walls, and hit the tree on the other side. The tree branches would hurt, but they would break his fall, and there was a pile of hay he had left under the tree to prevent further injury. Eslaf was about to leap when the occupant of the room woke up with a start, yelling, "My gem!" Eslaf stared at him. Eslaf stared at him for a second, wide-eyed. They looked alike, not surprising since they were brothers. Eslaf Earl's story is continued in the book Warrior. Spelling mistake up there, eh? Eslaf and stared at him? No, Eslaf stared at him. What's that and doing in there? Secret message, maybe. Well, here we go, Warrior, last book, I think, by Revan. This is the third book in a 4-book series. If you have not read the first 2 books, Beggar and Thief, you would be well advised to do so. Soybud Errol did not know much of his past, nor did he care to. As a child, he had lived in Errolgard, but the kingdom was very poor and taxes were, as a result, very high. He was too young to manage his abundant inheritance, but his servants, fearing that their master would be ruined, moved him to Jallenheim. No one knew why that location was picked. Some old maid, long dead now, had thought it was a good place to raise a child. No one else had a better idea. There may have been children with a more pampered, more spoiled existence than young Soybud, but that is doubtful. As he grew, he understood he was a rich, but he had nothing else. No family, no social position, no security at all. Loyalty, he found out on more than one occasion, cannot truly be bought. Knowing that he had but one asset, a vast fortune, he was determined to protect it and, if possible, increase it. Some otherwise perfectly nice people are greedy, but Soybud was that rare accident of nature, or breeding, who has no other interest but acquiring and hoarding gold. He was willing to do anything to increase his fortune. Most recently, he had begun secretly hiring mercenaries to attack desirable properties and then buying them when no one wanted to live there anymore. The attacks would then, of course, cease, since Soybud would have profitable land which he had purchased for a song. It had begun small, with a few farms, but recently he had begun a more ambitious campaign. In north-central SKYRIM, there is an area called the Alto, which is of unique geographical interest. It is a dormant volcanic valley surrounded on all sides of glaciers, so the earth is hot from the volcano, but the constant water drizzle and air is frigid. A grape called Jazbay grows there comfortably, and everywhere else in Tamriel it withers and dies. The strange vineyard is privately owned, and the wine produced from it is thus rare and extremely expensive. It is said that the emperor needs the permission of the imperial council to have a glass of it once a year. In order to harass the owner of the Alto into selling his land cheap, Soyabud had to hire more than a few mercenaries. He had to hire the finest private army in SKYRIM. Soyabud did not like spending money, but he had agreed to pay the general of the army, a woman called Fitra, a gem the size of an apple. He had not given it to her yet. Payment was to be delivered on the success of the mission. But he had trouble sleeping, knowing that he was going to be giving up such a prize. He always slept during the day, so he would watch his storehouse by night when he knew thieves were about. That brings us up to this moment, when after a fitful sleep, Soyabud woke up at about noon and surprised the thief in his bedroom. The thief was Eslaf. Eslaf had been contemplating a leap from the window, 100 feet down into the branches of a tree beyond the walls of the fortified palace, and a tumble into a stack of hay. Anyone who has ever attempted such a feat will testify that it takes some concentration and nerve to do such a thing. When he saw that a rich man sleeping in the room had awakened, both left him, and Eslaf slipped behind a tall ornamental shield on display to wait for Soyabud to go back to sleep. Soyabud did not go back to sleep. He had heard nothing, but could feel someone in the room with him. He stood up and began pacing the room. Soyabud paced and gradually decided that he was imagining things. No one was there. His fortune was safe and secure. He was returning to his bed when he heard a clunk. Turning around, he saw the gem, the one he was to give to Fitra, on the floor by the Atmoran cavalry shield. A hand reached out from behind the shield and grabbed it up. "Thief!" Soyabud cried out, grabbing a jeweled Akaviri katana from the wall and lunging at the shield. The fight between Eslaf and Soyabud will not go down in the annals of great duels. Soyabud did not know how to use a sword, and Eslaf was no expert at blocking with a shield. It was clumsy, it was awkward. Soyabud was furious, but was psychologically incapable of using the sword in any way that could damage its fine filigree, reducing its market value. Eslaf kept moving, dragging the shield with him, trying to keep it between him and the blade, which is, after all, the most essential part of any block. Soyabud screamed in frustration as he struck at the shield, bumping its way across the room. He even tried negotiating with the thief, explaining that the gem was promised to a great warrior named Fitra, and he would give it back. Soyabud would happily give him something else in return. Eslaf was not a genius, but he did not believe that. By the time Soyabud's guards came to the bedroom in response to their master's calls, he had succeeded in backing the shield into a window. They fell on the shield, having considerable more expertise with their swords than Soyabud did. But they discovered that there was no one behind it. Eslaf had leapt out the window and escaped. As he ran heavily through the streets of Jalenheim, making jingling noises from the gold coins in his pockets, and feeling the huge gem chaff where he had hidden it, Eslaf did not know where he should go next. He knew only that he could never go back to that town, and he must avoid this warrior named Fitra, who had claimed had the jewel. Eslaf Errol's story is continued in the book King. Well, I never knew that. I don't have it. Let's see if it's over here. Maybe at home.
If you need potions, you should try Arcadia's Cauldron.
Okie dokie.
I work for Bellathor at the general goods store.
And looks like I don't have it. Well, I'll be reading that book when I find it. So I'm on my journey. I'll let you know about it next